So after a long hiatus, I decided that we can do something like skyboxes. And I'm not covering weather properties here. Essentially, part of the weather object is its its capacity to provide a skybox, and that's really what I'm interested in. We could, the weather is really not especially challenging to undertake. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and duplicate Sovngarde Clear, this one here. So I'm just going to call it Space FX. Okay. And what I like to do before anything is basically go through all the layers that are not disabled and disable them. Those are mostly clouds superimposed on over each other, and it's if the NIF file itself is what expresses most of the skybox effects, you're not going to want to preview this with all these clouds in the way. And a lot of them are like low quality anyway. They kind of appear wonky. You can make a fully fledged and impressive skybox with the NIF file itself, not relying on any special effects over here in the properties. I think that's it. So that's done. Um, so this is actually done for now. We'll mess with those effects later. What we want to do now is go create a new world space. This is particularly useful if you want to use your skybox in interior cells. But nevertheless, you know, we would want to use it in regions as well, unless you want to use it in the entire world that you're making. Then you could just, I believe, select climate, which is somewhat more complicated because it interleaves different weather objects, if you will. So I'm just going to create that, and everything here is done. All we have to do is access the world. Now I'm going back to just some random small interior because of preview issues. So we want to stay out of that world space. Now we're going to go to regions and look at that world we just created, add a new region here. And we're going to say it's called region, whatever you want. This is just to designate distinctions among regions. I want it to stand out because I want to know what I'm looking at. Okay, and just create an enclosure here. Okay. And we want to enable weather here. In this tab, enable weather, we're going to add our weather we just created. No global, doesn't matter. 100%. Okay, that's done. Now, the rest is really customization. So after this, we're going to have to restart Creation Kit in order to get the region to load if we're selecting an interior cell. We'll do that later. So what I'd like to do is just start off with Skyrim. I think it's called Skyrim Aurora. No. Sovngarde Sky, that's the one, yeah. So Sovngarde Sky, and basically this is something that essentially has all its components exposed, in the sense that you can tell pretty clearly what everything does. So if I go to Sky here and do that, we have, whoops, we're upside down. We have the aurora, obviously in the center here. And then we have basically layers upon layers of different textures, different effects. We have an NI transform controller that targets the root node to apply rotation. So everything is rotating. And then we have some additional controllers underneath that. What I like to do is basically delete a bunch of stuff that I don't need, stick with basically the very basic outer layer and work from there. Now I like to use the newer version of NifSkope 2.0 or 2.0 Dev 7 for previewing, but I do not like to use it for processing and importing because it is inconsistent. It has some serious issues as far as providing a working, properly rendered object in Creation Kit, and obviously in Skyrim. But for previewing, it's obviously infinitely more useful. So this is what we have. Now I want to mention something that's somewhat of a curiosity that you might want to take advantage of if you're making a sky like this, which is Bethesda uses some of these tricks like alpha to produce different types of skies. So you'll notice that this is the NI alpha controller is producing this is what we have, and it's not producing the complete texture. So that's how you get the stars. And another thing is that this is a 5112 texture, 512 by 512. Not very high detailed. You don't need it to be high detailed because it's the resolution is scaled as such. So you need to be careful with these sky textures themselves. They have to be really high quality if you're going for something detailed, because if not, you'll get issues with appearance. I mean, some of them you could tell, for example, if there's a JPEG blur, if you're lazy and do something like that, that'll cause problems. I think this is fine for now. And so this is just a preview that I like to use. But before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and go back to this, load it up. I already have my additional mesh I want to put in there. I'm going to do something that kind of reflects or in honor, let's say, of facing worlds from Unreal Tournament or maybe UT3. I'm going to keep this in a node. I'm going to say this is going to be planet and add it to the children here. And move it appropriately. It's just a little bit higher than what I put. And even more than that. Ah, okay. Good. And so I also need to be careful as far as whether I want a BS Effect shader property or a BS lighting shader property. I'm going to go ahead and save this though, because at this point, once I've imported it in RC4, I should be able to use, for the most part, 2.0 Dev 7. At this point, it's safe to modify for most cases. There are some corner cases that I found to be an issue. So I decided just to basically clear it up and get kind of a very basic aura going on there. And, it's a tutorial, so I'm going to leave it at that. But there's a lot I could do here. Rotating asteroids, around the center of the skybox. Of course, the player will have the perspective of the center. So on and so forth. Now, the issue right now is simply that the Skybox is the origin is where the perspective is going to be. So I want to kind of move it down a little, um, as is appropriate. Oops, maybe that's plenty. So we're going to be looking from about here, and we really want a nice wide view of the planet. So I'm gonna kind of wing it here and say, okay, this looks good enough. We'll see how it looks. Okay, so let's save that, and I'm gonna go ahead and save it actually. Uh, let's see here, sky. Okay, and let's see. Now we can go ahead and go to effects and set our aurora to that thing specifically that we just created. Press OK. We'll save this. Now you're gonna have to restart it. In order to have the what would you say, the region show in the interior cell region list. Right? If you want to use this as a skybox for an interior, that's what you have to do. So just load it again. I'm gonna load it here. Where'd it go? Once you've reloaded, at this point you can basically update your NIF file and then just reload it by switching cells instead of having to restart Creation Kit. So let's create a cell, and we should be able to show the region here, as you see. Okay, so FC space, let's go ahead and go there. I'm gonna put something, let's see, something to orient this whole thing. I didn't mean to load static. Let's see, Dwemer, I don't know, just a bridge or something. Get an orientation of what is around us. Now, here's an important thing to note. We see that the aura is actually not showing. That's something we need to take care of in terms of the properties, but everything else is fine. The star textures, I'm not really a fan of that. And the nebulae are god awful, but let's deal with that very quickly. Yeah, and so of course there are some finishing touches that need to happen, really, if I'm being honest with myself. There's also the point of scale. This is nice, but at the same time, well, some lighting issues need to be adjusted that have to do with the BSFX effect shader properties. And you might want to change the BS lighting shader property just to see maybe there's a difference. You can it's BS lighting shader properties easier to tweak for sure, but you get the point. So that's not the one I want. Let's see here. So I don't know. Do you imagine facing worlds here in Skyrim? You have something like that. So yeah, I would say scale it down, adjust the stars a little bit. There's a lot we can do here. Add some rotating asteroids and stuff like that. I have other tutorials that can help you with doing things like that. So essentially at this point, you just have to modify the NIF file to your liking. And of course, you have to pay attention to the properties in the Nitri shapes and NI nodes. A couple things that might trip you up is vertex colors paired with PSFX effect shader property. also problems with some BS Effect shader property and BS Lighting shader property configurations do not render, and certain niche shape configurations do not render. You have to make sure everything is in order here, as far as flags and all, in order to make sure it shows in the Skybox. But generally speaking, at this point, it's up to you to modify the Skybox accordingly.